Jesus was the ultimate non-toxic man. Welcome back to Why Hope, the video series that explores reasons for hope in our day. We're in season 6, where we are looking at the life and teaching of Jesus and some of the ways that that gives us cause for hope. This is the final episode of this season, and here we're going to look at Jesus as the non-toxic man. Now, I'm drawing here on something I wrote in a book called The Bible Doesn't Tell Me So: Why You Don't Have to Submit to Domestic Abuse and Coercive Control. And this is just a little section that I'm drawing on. And I partly want to say that because I want to give a trigger warning. I'm going to tell some gospel stories today, but I'm going to draw some parallels with contemporary situations. And they are situations that are painful and could possibly be triggering. So I just wanted to mention that at the beginning. So we speak sometimes about toxic masculinity these days, don't we? And I want to show you, just give you 4 stories from the Gospels, probably stories you know very well indeed, but remind you of them and show you how Jesus deals so very tenderly and gently with everybody who is frail and vulnerable and at risk or marginal. And we've seen some of these examples already over the past 4 weeks. But let me show you 4 more. So first of all, I want to remind you of the story of the bleeding woman, which we read in Luke chapter 8. This is a woman who's been bleeding for many years. And some of you, like me, will know just how debilitating it is to have a really heavy period that goes on and on. And if that were untreated, it would make the woman anemic, weak, just utterly miserable and debilitated. And in addition to all of those physical symptoms that she would have experienced, she's spent all her money on doctors who weren't able to help her, so she's now impoverished. And she is a social outcast because of the uncleanness laws. She's not allowed out in society. Anything she touches or sits on becomes unclean for the rest of the day. Her husband isn't supposed to have sex with her. So she has lived in this marginal existence for so long. And she hears the preachers in town, and she dares to creep up behind him. And she doesn't dare to ask him for healing or to touch him, but she touches the hem of his coat. And so many of the men in that crowd, if they had known that she was there, if she'd touched them, they'd have leapt away in revulsion and horror. But Jesus doesn't do that. He feels the power, the healing power, leave his body, and he turns around and finds her. And he speaks to her lovingly, speaks to her as daughter, which is not patronising like it would sound today, but in those days is just a beautiful term of endearment, honours her, and of course says that she has been healed on account of her faith. A second story from John chapter 8 is the woman taken in the act of adultery. I don't know where the man was. It takes 2 to tango, as they say. But it's only the woman that they bring to Jesus. And really this is all about Jesus, all about them the religious leaders trying to trap him. They want him either to say, no, we're not going to stone her to death, which is the punishment according to the law of Moses, in which case they can get him for being seditious, or they want him to take up a stone and be the first to strike her and to kind of deny all that he has been and stood for in terms of his gentleness, and also maybe got him into trouble with the Romans as well. So they think they've got him in a cleft stick, and they bring this woman to him, and I want to know what she's wearing. Is she just wearing a bed sheet? Kind of sounds like that, doesn't it? But either way, she's utterly humiliated before this baying mob of men who just can't wait to carve their hate into her body with their stones. And Jesus does something that has created so much speculation over the years to try and explain it, because he bends down and writes in the dust. And what was he writing? What's he doing? What's it about? And lots of reasons have been given. This is my opinion. I think he simply looks away because he doesn't want to kind of stare at her the way that her accusers are, subjecting her to what they call the male gaze, that kind of hostile, perhaps lustful gaze. And he's not going to do that to her. And so he looks away to give her space and dignity. And of course, he speaks the words that shames everybody into leaving. And then he speaks to her. He speaks words of love and truth. He doesn't say, oh, it doesn't matter, it's fine. Just, do your own thing. You do you. He doesn't say that. He says, I don't condemn you, but go and sin no more. But he's beautiful, non-toxic in the way that he deals with her. And then there's the Samaritan woman in John 4. This woman has had 5 husbands and now is living with a man who is not her husband. And so often she has been portrayed as a loose woman as a consequence. But let me tell you, no woman in that day is going to choose to divorce 5 husbands. Divorce was very difficult for women in any case. So she has either been widowed many times, or perhaps divorced many times, perhaps because she is unable to bear children. We don't know her backstory. There's no good reason to think that she's been serially sexually unfaithful. And yet that's how she's been characterised. But whatever the backstory, she's a woman who has suffered greatly and is probably a woman who has experienced trauma. And you will know, I suspect, that sometimes people who have been traumatised, people who have been abused, sometimes carry a vulnerability which others prey upon. And in the work I was doing around domestic abuse, I so often encountered those stories of people who disclosed that they were being abused, perhaps in a church or in their home. And the person they disclosed it to took that as an opportunity to start abusing them themselves. Horrible, dreadful stories. And I wonder if this is what this woman has experienced. And I wonder if that's what she thinks when she's heading to the well in the middle of the day and she sees a man sitting there and she thinks, oh, I think I can guess what the price of water is going to be today. Well, she did think that. She was never more wrong, because the man that she met that day at the well was the man that she was safest with in all the world. A man who speaks love and dignity, truth and healing into her life. A man who offers her salvation. A man with whom she is utterly safe, because this is the ultimate non-toxic man. And then the final story is the story of the woman who has been forgiven a great sin. And we don't know what that sin is. And we often tend to assume it was some sexual sin. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. We don't know that. But she is so grateful that she's been forgiven, that she makes her way into a private feast, a private meal where Jesus is eating with some other people. And she comes and weeps over his feet and pours perfume over them and dries them with her hair. And even in the 21st century, that act sounds remarkably intimate. But in the first century, when ethical standards, moral standards, sexual standards were somewhat tighter than they are, at least in Britain today, can you imagine the nudging and the eyebrow raising that's going on when this happens? And I'm wondering what the sort of comments were in the room. But Jesus doesn't take advantage of that vulnerability. Once again, a bit like the previous story, once again he simply speaks words of love, acceptance, affirmation, forgiveness, and he even commends her, because he's the ultimate non-toxic man. So I don't know what your experience has been, whether you have experienced harm at the hands of others, those who've wielded power perhaps against you in difficult, harmful ways. If you haven't personally experienced it, you will know of such stories. The Saviour we follow, he has enormous power, but he never uses it to cause harm to the weak. He lifts the head of the weak. He forgives the broken. He finds the outcast. And he is utterly safe for those who have experienced harm at the hands of others. The ultimate non-toxic man. And here's yet another reason why we can have hope.